played by our resident understudy, and the role of his dinner guest shall be played by, oh, shall be played by you. Well, break a leg then. Shh. One confidential evening, not 3 months ago, Lionel Walters told me this story of the new wall. And at the time, I thought that so far as he was concerned, it was a true story. He told me with such a direct simplicity of conviction that I could not do otherwise than believe him. But in the morning, I woke to a different atmosphere, and as I lay in bed, I recalled the things he had told me, stripped of the glamour of his earnest, slow voice, denuded of the focused and shading deep light, the shadowy atmosphere that wrapped about him, and the pleasant, bright things that his servant and glasses inebriated the dinner we had shared, making them, for the time, a bright little world, quite cut off from everyday realities. I saw it all as frankly incredible. He was mystified, I said, and then how well he did it. It isn't quite the thing I should have expected him, of all people, to do well. Afterwards, as I sat in bed, then sipped my morning tea, I found myself trying to account for the flavor of reality that perplexed me in his impossible reminiscences, by supposing that he'd in some way suggest, present, convey, I hardly know which word to use, experiences it was otherwise impossible to tell. Well, I think we sort of that explanation now. I've gotten over my intervening doubts. I believe now, as I believed at the moment of telling, that Wallace did, and to the very best of his ability, strip the truth of his secret from me. And whether he himself saw, or what he thought he saw, whether he himself was the possessor of an inestimable privilege, or the victim of a fantastic dream, I cannot pretend to guess. Even the facts of his death, which ended my doubts forever, throw no light on that. That much the reader must judge for himself. I forget now what chance comment or criticism of mine moves so reticent a man to confide in me. He was, I think, defending himself against an imputation of slackness or unreliability I had made in relation to a great public movement in which he had disappointed me. But he plunged suddenly. I have, he said, a preoccupation. I know, he went on, after a pause that he devoted to the study of summer ash. I have been negligent. The fact is, it isn't a case of ghosts or apparitions, but it's an odd thing to tell of, Redmond. I'm haunted by something that rather takes the light out of things that fills me with longings. Almost checked by that English shyness that so often overcomes us when we would speak of moving, rave, or beautiful things. You're right to St. Alliston's, he said. In a moment, that seemed to me quite irrelevant. Well, and he paused. Then, very openly at first, afterwards more easily, he began to tell of a thing that was hidden in his life, the haunting memory of a beauty and a happiness that filled his heart with insatiable longings that made all the interests and spectacle of worldly life seem dull, tedious. darkness and veiled him. Now that I have the clue to it, the thing seems written visibly in his face. I found a photograph in which that look of detachment has been caught and intensified. It reminds me of what a woman once said of him. A woman who loved him greatly. Suddenly, she said, the interest goes out of him. He forgets you. He doesn't care a rap for you. Under his very nose. Yet the interest was not always out of him. And when he was holding his attention to a thing, Wallace could contrive to be an extremely successful man. His career, indeed, his several successes. He left me behind him long ago. He soared up over my head and got a figure in the world that I couldn't cut. Anyhow, he was still a year short of 40. They say now he would have been in office very probably in the new cabinet if he had lived. At school, he'd always beat me without effort. That was by nature. We were at school together at St. Valentine's College in West Kensington for almost all school time. He came into school as my coach model, but he left far above me in a blaze of scholarships, brilliant performance. Yet I think I made him fair and try. It was in school I heard first of the door in the wall. That I was to hear of his second time, only a month before his death. To him, at least, the door in the wall was a real door leading through a real wall to mortal realities. Of that I'm now pretty sure. And it came to his life early, when he was a little fellow between 5 and 6. I remember how, as he sat making his confession to me with a slow gravity, he reasoned and reckoned the date of it. There was, he said, a crimson Virginia Reaper in it, all one bright uniform crimson in a clear amber sunshine against a white wall. That came to the impression somehow, though I don't clearly remember how. And there were horse chestnut leaves on the clean pavement outside the great door. They were blotched yellow and green, not brown or dirty. So they must have been newly fallen. I take it that means October. I look out for horse chestnut leaves every year, and I ought to know. If I'm right in that, I was about 5 years and 4 months old. He was, he said, a rather precocious little boy. He learned to talk at an abnormally early age, and he was so sane and old-fashioned, as people say, that he was permitted an amount of initiative that most children scarcely attain by 7 or 8. So the time when he was born, and he was under the less vigilant and authoritative care of a nursery governess. His father was a stern, preoccupied lawyer who gave him little attention and expected great things of him. For all his brightness, he found life a little grey and dull, I think. And one day, he wondered. He could not recall the particular neglect that enabled him to get away, nor the course he took, the West Kensington roads. All that had faded among the incurable blurs of memory. But the white wall and the green door stood out quite distinctly. As his memory of that remote childish experience ran, indeed the very first sight of that door experienced a peculiar emotion and attraction, a desire to get to the door and open it and walk in. And at the same time, he had the clearest conviction that either he was unwise or was wrong of him, and he could not tell which, to yield to this attraction. He insisted upon it as a curious thing that he knew from the very beginning, unless memories played him the curious trick that the door was unfastened, and that he could go in as he chose. I seemed to see the figure of that little boy, drawn and rebelled. It was very clearly in his mind, too, though why it should be so was never explained, that his father would be very angry if he went through that door. Wallace described all these moments of hesitation to me with the utmost particularity. He went right past the door, and then, with his hands in his pockets, and making an infinite whistle, strode right along beyond the end. There, he recalls, a number of mean, dirty shops, and particularly that of a plumber and decorator, with a dusty disorder of earthenware pipes, sheep-lead ball taps, pattern books of wallpaper, and tins of enamel. He stood, pretending to examine these things, and coveting, passionately desiring the great door. Then he said, he had a gust of emotion. He made a run for it, lest hesitation should grip him again. He went plump with outstretched hand through the ring door, and let it slam behind him. So, in a trice, he came into the garden that is haunted all his life. It was very difficult for Wallace to give me his full sense of that garden into which he came. There was something in the very air of it that exhilarated, that gave one a sense of lightness and good happening and well-being. There was something in the sight of it that made all its color clean and perfect and suddenly luminous. In the instant of coming into it, one was exquisitely glad, as only in rare moments, and when one is young and joyful, one can be glad in this world. And everything was beautiful there. Wallace mused before he went on telling me. You see, he said, with the doubtful inflection of a man who pauses at incredible things, there were two great panthers there. Yes, spotted panthers. And I was not afraid. There was a long, wide path with marble-edge flower borders on either side, and the two huge velvety beasts were playing there with a ball. One looked up and came towards me, a little curious, and came right up to me, rubbed its soft round ear very gently against the small hand I held out. It purred. It was a deluding enchanted garden. I know. And the sun, it stretched far and wide, this way and that. I believe there were hills far away. Heaven knows where it then suddenly got to. And somehow it was just like coming home. You know, in the very moment that horse swung to behind me, I had forgotten the road with its rolling chestnut days, its cabs, and trains, and its carts. I forgot the sort of gravitational pull back to the discipline, to Petersville. I forgot all the hesitation and fear. I forgot discretion. I forgot all the intimate realities of this life. I became in a moment very glad and one happy little boy in another world. It was a world with a different quality, a warmer, more penetrating and mellow light, with a faint, clear gladness in its air, in wisps of sun-touched cloud in the blueness of its sky. And before me ran this long, wide path, invitingly, with weedless bed on either side, rich with one-dented flowers. And these two great panthers, and put my little hands fiercely on the soft fur, and caressed their round ears, and the sensitive corners under the ears, and played with them. It was as though they welcomed me home. There was a keen sense of homecoming in my mind, and when presently a tall, fair girl, a bear in the pathway, and came to meet me, smiling, and said, "Well, do," and took me and kissed me, and put me down, and led me by the hand. There was no amazement, but only an impression of delightful brightness, of being reminded of happy things that had in some strange way been overlooked. There were broad steps, I remember. They came into view between spikes of delphinium, and up these we went to a great avenue between very old and shady dark trees. All down this avenue, between the red chapter stems were mobile scenes of honor and statuary, very deep and friendly white doves. And along this avenue, my girlfriend led me, looking down. I recall the pleasant lines, the folly mock chin of her sweet country face, asking me questions in a soft, agreeable voice, and telling me things, pleasant things, I know. Though what they were, I was never able to recall. And presently, a little commotion, one very clean, one with fur, ruddy brown, and kindly easy eyes, leaned down a tree to us, and ran beside me, looking up at me, grinning, and presently looked my shoulder. So we went on our way in great happiness. He paused. Go on, I said. I remember little things. We passed an old bank music among laurels, I remember. And the blaze came in barricades, and came through a broad shaded colonnade to a spacious old palace full of pleasant fountains, full of beautiful things, full of the quality, promise of heart's desire. There are many things and many people, some that still seem to stand out clearly, and some that look fake, but all these people were beautiful and kind. In some way, I don't know how, it was conveyed to me that they all were kind to me, glad to have me there, and filling me with gladness by the gestures, by the touch of their hands, by the welcome and love in their eyes. Yes, they mused for a while. Playmates around there. That was very much to me, because I was a lonely little boy. They played delightful games in a grass-covered court. There was a sundial set about with flowers, and as one played, one loved. But it's odd. There's a gap in my memory. I don't remember the games we played. I never remembered. Afterwards, as a child, I spent long hours trying, even with tears, to recall the form of that happiness. I wanted to play it all over again. In my nursery, I was happy. Well, all I remember is the happiness and two dear playfellows were most with me. Then, presently, a somber dark woman with a grave pale face and dreamy eyes, a somber woman wearing a solid long robe, pale purple, who carried a book, and beckoned and took me aside with her into a gathering. The white belongings who looked at me go, and ceased the game, and stood watching as I was carried away. "Come back to us," they cried. "Come back to us soon." I looked up at her face, but she heeded them not. Her face was very gentle and grave. She took me to a secret gathering. I stood beside her, ready to look at her book. She opened it up on her knee. The pages fell open. She pointed, and I looked, marveling. For in the living pages of that book, I saw myself. It was a story about myself. In it were all the things that had happened to me since ever I was born. It was wonderful to me, because the pages of that book were not pictures, you understand, but reality. Go on, I said. I understand. There were realities, yes, they must have been. People moved, and things came and went. And my dear mother, oh, many have forgotten. Then my father, stern and upright. The servants, the nursery, all the familiar things of home. Then the front door, and the busy streets, traveling to and fro. I looked and marveled, and looked half doubtfully again to the woman's face, and turned the pages over, skipping this and that, to see more of this book, more. And so, at last, I came to myself, hovering and hesitating outside the green door in the long white hall, and felt again the conflict and the fear. And next, I cried, and would have turned on, but the hand of the grave woman delayed me. Next, I insisted, and struggled gently with her hand, pulling up her fingers with all my childish strength. And as she yielded, and the page came over, she bent down upon me like a shadow, and kissed my brow. But the page did not show the enchanted garden, nor the panthers, nor the girl who led me by the hand, nor the playfellows who went so low to let me go. It showed a long grey street in West Kensington, on that chill hour of afternoon before the lamps are lit. And I was there, a wretched little figure, weeping aloud, all that I could do to restrain myself. And I was weeping because I could not return to my dear playfellows, who would call after me, come back to us soon. I was there. This was not picture and book, but harsh reality, that enchanted place, and the restrained hand of the grave mother, and it was near it stood, and gone, whither had it gone? Yielded again. I remained for a time, staring into the fire. Oh, the wretchedness of that return, he murmured. Well, I said, after a minute or so. Poor little wretch I was, brought back to this grey world again. As I realized the fullness of what had happened to me, I gave way to quite uncomfortable grief, and the shame and humiliation of that public weeping, and my disgraceful homecoming remained with me still. I see again the benevolent-looking old gentleman in gold spectacles stopped and spoke to me, prodded me first with the umbrella. "Poor little chap," said he, "and are you lost then?" And me, a London boy of 5 and more. And he must needs bring in a kindly young policeman, and make a ground of me, and so watch me home. Sobbing, conspicuous, frightened, I came from the enchanted garden to the steps of my father's house. That is as well as I can remember my vision of the garden that haunts me still. Of course, I can convey nothing of that indescribable quality of translucent reality, that difference from the common things of experience that hung about it all. But that is what happened. If it was a dream, I am sure it was a daytime, an altogether extraordinary dream. Naturally, there followed a terrible questioning by my aunt and my father, the nurse, the governess, everyone. I've tried to tell them how my father came in first thrashing for 10 flies. But afterwards, I tried to tell my aunt. She punished me again for my wicked persistence. Then, as I said, everyone's forbidden to listen to hear a word about it. Even my fairy tale books were taken away from me for a time, because I was too imaginative. Yeah, yes, they did that. My father belonged to the old school, and my store was driven back upon myself. I whispered to my pillow. My pillow was all damp and salt to my whispering lips. childish tears, and I added always to my visual less full of my prayers this one heartfelt request. Please, God, may I dream of the garden. Oh, take me back to my garden. Take me back to my garden. I jumped off of the garden. I may have added to it, I may have changed it. I do not know. All this, you understand, is an attempt to reconstruct from fragmentary memories of a very early experience. Between that and the other consecutive memories of my boyhood, there is a gulf. A time came when it seemed impossible I should ever speak of that one glimpse again. I asked him all his question. No, he said, I don't remember that I ever attempted to find my way back to the garden in those early years. It seems hard to me now. But I think that very probably a closer watch was kept on my movements after this misadventure to prevent my going astray. Now, it was until you knowing that I tried for the garden again. And I believe there was a period, incredible as it seems now, when I forgot the garden altogether. When I was about 8 or 9, maybe. Do you remember me as a kid in St. Anthony's? I did show any signs, did I? Those days of having a secret room. He looked up with some smile. Did you ever play Northwest Passage with me? I know, of course, you didn't come my way. It was the sort of a game, he went on, that every imaginative child plays all day long. The idea was the discovery of the Northwest Passage to school. The way to school was plain enough. The game consisted of finding some way that wasn't plain, starting off 10 minutes early in some almost hopeless direction, and working one's way around the undercut of some streets to my goal. And one day, I got entangled along another low glass streets on the other side of the Camden Hill, and I began to think for once the game would be against me, and that I should get to school late. I tried rather desperately a street that seemed a cul-de-sac, and found a passage at the end. I hurried through that and knew I should do it yet, I said. I passed a row of promising little shops that were inexplicably familiar to me. And behold, there was my long white wall and the green door that led to the enchanted garden. The thing whacked upon me suddenly. Then, after all, that garden, that wonderful garden, wasn't a dream. It paused. I suppose my second experience with the green door marks the world of difference there is between the busy life of a schoolboy and the infinite leisure of a child. Anyhow, this second time, I didn't for a moment think of going in straight away. You see, for one thing, my mind was full of the idea of getting to school in time, set on not breaking my record. Punctuality. I must surely have felt some little desire, at least to try the door. Yes, I must have felt that. But I seem to remember the attraction of the door mainly as another obstacle to my overmastering urge to get to school. I was immediately interested by this discovery I made, of course. I went on with my mind full of it, but I went on. It didn't enchant me. I ran past, taking out my watch, found I had 10 minutes still to spare. And then I was going down the hill into familiar surroundings. I got to school, breathless and full, and wet with perspiration. What in time? I can remember hanging out my coat and going right behind, left behind me. On, hey? He looked at me thoughtfully. Of course, I didn't know then that it would always be there. So a boy had lived imaginations. I suppose I thought it was an awfully jolly thing to have it there, to know my way back to it. But there was the school talking at me. I expect I was a good deal distraught and inattentive that morning, to recalling what I could of the beautiful stranger I should presently see again. Oddly enough, I had no doubt in my mind that they would be glad to see me. Yes, I must have thought of the garden that morning, just as a jolly sort of place to which one might resort in the intervals of a strenuous scholastic career. I didn't go that day at all. The next day was half holiday, and that may have weighed with me. Perhaps, too, my state of inattention brought down a decision upon me, and don't the time necessary for the detour. I don't know. What I do know is that, in the meantime, the enchanted garden was so much upon my mind that I could not keep to it. I told, what was his name? The very dear-looking youngster we used to call Squiff. Young Hopkins, said I. Hopkins it was. I did not like telling him. I had a feeling that in some way it was against the rules to tell him, but I did. He was walking part of the way home with me. He was talkative, and if we had not talked about the enchanted garden, we would have talked of something else. It was intolerable to me to think about any other subject. So I planned. Well, he told my secret. The next day, the blade of all, I found myself surrounded by half a dozen big boys, and teasing and holding curiosity of more of the enchanted garden. There was that big faucet in Brim, and Carnaby, and Holy Reynolds. You weren't there by any chance? No, I think I should remember it if you were. A boy is a creature of odd feelings. I really believe, in spite of my secret self-disgust, a little flattered to have the attention of these big fellows. I remember particularly the moment of pleasure caused by the praise of Crawshaw. You remember Crawshaw, Major, the son of Crawshaw, the composer, who said it was the best line he'd ever heard. But at the same time, there was a really painful undertow of shame and telling what I felt was indeed a secret. That beast Fawcett made a joke about the girl in green. What was his voice saying to you with a keen memory of that shame? I pretended not to hear, he said. Well, then Carnaby suddenly called me a young liar and disputed with me when I said the thing was true. I said I knew that if I at the green door could lead them all there in 10 minutes. Carnaby became outrageously virtuous and said I'd have to, and bear out my words or suffer. Did you ever have Carnaby twist your arm? Then perhaps you'll understand how it went with me. I swore my story was true. There was nobody in the school that this ever chap Carnaby, though Crawshaw put in a word or so. Carnaby had got his skin. I grew excited and red-eared and a little frightened. I behaved altogether like a silly little chap, and the outcome of it all was that instead of starting a load from my enchanted garden, I led the way presently, cheeks flushed, ears hot, eyes smarting, and my soul one burning misery and shame for a body of 6 mocking, curious, and threatening schoolfellows. We never found Whitewall in the green door. You mean I couldn't find it? I would have found it if I could. And afterwards, when I could go alone, I couldn't find it. I never found it. I seem now to have always been looking for it from my schoolboy days, but I've never come upon it again. The fellows make it disagreeable. Beastly. Corby held a council over me for wanted lying. I remember how I sneaked him and upstairs to hide the marks of my blood. But I ran myself to sleep at last. It wasn't for Cordy, but for the garden, for the beautiful afternoon I'd hoped for the sweet, friendly women and the waiting playfellows, and the game I'd hoped to learn again. The beautiful, forgotten game. I believe firmly that if I had not told, I've had times after that, crying at night and wool gathering by day. For 2 terms I had slackened and had bad reports. Do you remember? Of course you would. It was your redeeming mathematics that brought me back to the grind again. For a time, my friend stared silently into the heart of the fire. Then he said, I never saw it again until I was 17. It leapt upon me for the 3rd time as I was driving to Paddington on my way to Oxford in a scholarship. I had just one momentary glimpse. I was leaning over the apron of my hansom, smoking a cigarette, and no doubt thinking myself no end of a man of the world. And suddenly there was the door, the wall, and the dear sense of unforgettable and still attainable things. Recollected mine. I was too taken by surprise to stop my cab until we were well past and round the corner. Then, at a quick moment, a double and divergent movement of mind will. I jumped to the door of the cab and broke mine down to pull out my watch. Yes, said the cabman, smartly. It's nothing, I cried. My mistake. We haven't much time. Go on. And he went on. And the night after I was told of that, I set off my fire in my little lumber room, my study, in my father's house. His praise is rare praise. It is sound counsel ringing in my ears. And I smoked my favorite pipe, the formidable dog of adolescence, and thought of that door in the long white wall. If I had stopped, I thought, I should have missed my scholarship. I should have missed Oxford. All the fine career before me. I begin to see things better. Confusing indeed, but I did not doubt then this grim mind was a thing that merited sacrifice. Dear friends, the atmosphere seemed very sweet to me, very fine, but remote. My grip is fixing now. The world. I saw another door opening, the door of my career. He stood again to the fire. Its red lights bit down the stone and strength in his face for just one flickering moment, and then vanished again. Well, he said, inside, I've served that career. I've done much work, much hard work, but I've dreamt of the enchanted garden, 1,000 dreams, and seen its door, or at least glimpsed its door, 4 times since then. Yes, 4 times. For a while this world was so bright, interesting, seemed so full of meaning and opportunity that the path to visit charm of the garden was by comparison gentle and remote. It was to make paths over dinner with pretty women and distinguished men. I came down to London from Oxford, a man of bold promise that I have done something to redeem something, and yet there have been disappointments. Twice I've been in love. I will not dwell on that, but once, yes, I went to someone who I know, doubted whether I dared to come. I took a shortcut, an adventure, through an unfrequented road near girls' court. And so happened on a white wall, the familiar ring door. I said to myself that I thought this place was on Captain Hill. It's the place I never could find somehow. Like counting Stonehenge, the place of that queer daydream of mine. And I abide intent upon my purpose. It had no appeal to me that afternoon. I had just a moment's impulse to try the door. 3 steps aside would need it the most. Though I was sure enough in my heart it would hold it to me. And then I thought that doing so might delay me on the way to Temple Flemington, which I thought in my honor was a fault. Afterwards, I was sorry for my punctuality. I might at least sort of peeped in, I thought. Waved a hand to those panthers. But I knew enough at this time not to see again, belatedly, that which is not found by seeking him. Yes, that I may be very sorry. Yes, upon working out that, and never a sight of the door. It's only recently discovered back to me. With those common sense, as though something tarnished has spread itself over my world. I began to think of it as a soul, a bitter thing that I should never see that door again. Perhaps I was suffering a little from overwhelm. Perhaps it was what I have heard spoken of as the feeling of foreboding. I don't know. But certainly the keen brightness that makes effort easy has gone out of things recently. And that just at a time with all these new conjugal developments when I ought to be working. Hard, isn't it? But it took me to find life toilsome. Its rewards as I come near them. I began a little while ago to mourn the garden like that. Yes, and I've seen it 3 times. The garden. No, the door. And I haven't gone in. He leaned over the table to me with an enormous sorrow in his voice as he spoke. The rice. I have had my chance. The rice. If ever that door offers itself to me again, I swore I will go in out of this dust and heat, out of this dry glitter of vanity, out of these toilsome futilities. I will go and never return. This time I will stay. I swore it, and when the time came, I didn't go. 3 times. And 1 year had passed that door, and failed to enter 3 times in the last year. The first time was the night of that snatched division of the dense retention bill, on which the government was saved by a majority of 3. You remember? No one on our side, perhaps very few on the opposite side, expected the end that night. Then the debate collapsed. Like eggshells, my conjugates were dining with his cousin in Brentford, who were both in bed. They were called up by telephone, and set off at once in his cousin's motor. We got in barely in time, and on the way we passed by a wall and door. Livid in the moonlight, launched, one hot yellow as the glare of our lamps let it, but unmistakable. My God, cried I. What's it, Hodges? Nothing answered, and the moment passed. I made a great sacrifice. I told the weird best I got in. They all have, he said, and hurried by. I do not see how I could have done otherwise then. And the next occasion was as I rushed to my father's bedside to bid that stern old man farewell. Then to the claims line were narrative. But the 3rd time was different. It happened a week ago. It feels without remorse to roll it. That was with Gerger and Rouse. It's no secret now, you know, that I have had my toll with Gerger. We've been dining at Frobisher's, and the talk had come intimate between us. The question of my place in the Reconstruction Ministry always over the boundary of the discussion. Yes. I told them. They didn't talk about it yet. There's no reason to get a secret for you. Yes, thanks. But let me tell you my story. Then, on that night, things were very much in the air. My position was a very delicate one. I was keenly anxious to get some definite word from Gurg, but I was handed by Raoul's presence. I was using the best power of my brain to keep that light in careless talk, not too obviously directed to the point that concerns me. I had to. Raoul's failure since has more than justified my caution. Rouse I knew would leave us beyond the Kensington High Street, and then I could surprise Gurga by a sudden frankness. One has sometimes to resort to these little devices. And then it was, in the margin of my field of vision, I became aware once more of the white wall, the great door before us, down the road. We passed him talking. I passed it. I could still see the shadow of Gurga's marked profile. His opera head tilted forward over his prominent nose, the many folds of his neck wrap going before my shadow, and Rouse as we sauntered past. I passed within 20 inches of the door, and when I said goodnight, go in, I asked myself, what will happen? And I was all tickled over that word, Gurga. I could not answer that question in the tangle of my other problems. They will think me mad, I thought, and suppose I vanish now, on basing disappearance of prominent bone tissue. That weighed with me, 1,000 conceived petty worldliness weighed with me, and that crisis. Then he turned on me with a sorrowful smile, speaking slowly. Here I am, he said. Here I am, he repeated. And my chances have called for me 3 times. But here, the door has been offered me. The door that goes into peace, into light, into beauty beyond dreaming. A kindness no man on earth could know. And I rejected to remit. It is gone. How do you know? I know. I am left now to work it out, to stick to the task that helped me so strongly when my moments came. You say of success, this vulgar, torturing box of envy thing, I have it. Yet all the thing is beginning. If that was my success, he said, and crushed it, and held it out for me to see. If he tell me something right, his loss has destroyed me for 2 months, for 10 weeks nearly now. I have done no work at all, except the most necessary and urgent duties. And my soul is full of unpeaceful regrets and nights when it's less likely I should have recognized. I go out, I wander, yes. Now what would you think of them if they knew a cabinet minister, the responsible head of that most vital of all departments, wandering alone, grieving, sometimes near audibly lamenting for a door, for a gone. I can see now his rather pallid face, and the unfamiliar somber fire that had come into his eyes. I see him very vividly tonight. I sit recalling his words, his tones. And last evening's Westminster Gazette still lies on my sofa, containing the notice of his death. At lunch today, the club was busy with him, and the strange riddle of his fate. They found his body very early yesterday morning in a deep excavation near East Kensington Station. It's one of 2 shops that have been made in connection with the extension of the railway southward. It is protected from intrusion of the public by a hoarding on the high road, in which a small doorway has been cut for the convenience of some workmen who live in that direction. The doorway was left unfastened through a misunderstanding between two canvas, and through it he made his way. My mind is darkened with questions and riddles. You would all the way from the house that night. He's frequently walked home during the past session. And so it is, I figure, start for home along the late and empty streets around town and dead, and then to the pale electric lights of the station, children lagging, and it was evidence of flight. To that fatal unfastened door awakened some memory. Was there, after all, ever any green door in the wall at all? I do not know. I took the story as he told it to me. There are times when I believe that Wallace was no more than the victim of the coincidence rare but not unprecedented type of hallucination and the canvas trap. But that, indeed, is not my profoundest belief. You may think me superstitious, if you will, and foolish, but indeed, I am more than half convinced that he had, in truth, an abnormal gift, and his sense something, I know not what, that in the eyes of wall and door offered him an outlet, a secret and peculiar passage of escape to another and altogether more beautiful world. At any rate, you will say, it betrayed him in the end. But did it betray him? There you touch the inmost mystery of these dreamers, the cemented vision, the imagination. We see our world fair and common, the hoarding in the pit. By our daylight standard, he walked out of security, into darkness, danger, and death. But did he see like that?